thanks everyone for your attention today and for being here. We're going to jump into our first panel presentation. We're going to have one tomorrow as well. And we're going to start with the four gentlemen up here and how they manage competition schedules and training load in their organisations. So we want to find out how do the different sports, national teams and technical organisations manage performance and training load across the different competitions and operator schedules. So thanks guys for joining us. Our panel is James Bunce, the Director of High Performance at US Soccer. We've got Clive Brewer, the Assistant Director of High Performance, Toronto Blue Jays. Dale Lablams, Head of S&C, Canadian Special Operations Forces Command. And we've got Bob Poehling, Athletic Development Coordinator, Women's Alpine from the US Ski and Snowboard. Just quickly, a bit of background in myself. Tom, if you haven't met me, a sports scientist at Fusion Sport. I've been with the company sort of 6 years now and worked across, here we go. I worked across the globe, started in Australia, went through the Manchester office and now been here for 3 years. So I've seen a lot of different organisations, I've seen a lot of different schedules and really interested, especially in this US market, of how these four organisations handle that. It's a really challenging environment across the US here. Baseball, probably very significant with the amount of games that they handle, but just certainly interested to gain the insight from these guys here today. We're just going to start, if that's all right, with the guys just giving a brief introduction, an overview of their position and what their schedules look like in their organisation. Bob, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us up here, and hopefully we can provide some insight to everyone. So I'm the Athletic Development Coordinator for Women's Alpine, so mostly work on the women's side. I have a separate colleague on the men's side as well. But quick background on ski racing, because I'll probably mention it, but you'll have the speed events, so downhill and Super G, a little faster, less technical, and then you have the technical events, which are shorter radius turns and a little shorter. But quick overview of the season. We have a prep period during the summer, and the unique thing about that part is that there's really no opportunity for technical training during that period. So there's no technical practice. You can't water ramp, you can't roller ski, you can't go out on the pitch. So we have full control of their mental, physical energy for the whole summer, which is quite fun and a unique challenge. And then we get into the competition period, where the entire competition period, more or less, takes place in Europe. So as a staff member, I literally moved out of my apartment for 6 months of the year. So we just live in Europe. There's somewhere between, depending on the racer, 8 and up to 40 events over the winter, and it's about every weekend, so Saturday, Sunday, some more in the week. And then you heard Gus mention that Michaela Schifrin trained for 11 hours total through the season, actually in course. Well, he didn't mention that it took place over 450 hours on snow. So the actual ratio of what you're doing on snow and what you're actually doing in terms of practice is actually quite low. So we would really have to maximize some of that time. But that's the brief.
Hey, I'm going to try and navigate this without delivering my talk tomorrow, if that makes sense. Because all the questions you're going to ask me, I'm probably going to say I'll talk about that tomorrow. Which means actually everyone can have a good night tonight and not worry about coming tomorrow morning. So I oversee the performance programs for the Blue Jays, which starts at the major league, but then there are 8 feeder teams below that. So 330 players, 52 members of staff, roughly, within my remit. So, and the biggest challenge for that, obviously, as people will understand, is the Major League playing schedule. 162 games in 180 days. So that's a fair challenge, and obviously there's travel within that. And a lot of people say to me, "What's it like living in Toronto?" I have no idea. So as a Major League organisation, we're actually in Toronto for 81 days of the year. That's it. We're there for home games. The actual business side of it is based in Toronto, but the high performance operations, the player development side, is all based in Florida, out of the spring training facility. So we have a rehab complex down there and the spring training complex. And on any given day, I am somewhere between Florida, Vancouver, Toronto, or the Dominican Republic, overseeing one of our 9 delivery programs within that. So the player challenges, obviously, within that. So we've got the games. We practice every day, we play every day, and then we've got to do the strength training, the preparation, the recovery, etc. around those games. So I can get in specific examples around how we do that. And then the other thing is when we transfer players or move players between affiliates. So if someone gets injured at the Major League, we take them, the rehab is all done in Florida, but there's a knock-on effect then we have to move players up through, which also means we've got to keep players on a rotation at AAA and AA so that they can move up and slip straight into a rotation. So it's a pretty complex minefield about how we manage those players' schedules around things.
So lead a strength and conditioning for CANSOFCOM, and within our unit, we actually have a helicopter unit, a training school, and then an operational unit. So for the sake of this, we'll focus on the operational unit. And so this is really interesting. This has been my first job with the tactical populations. Previously, I'd been in track and field. And so I've gone from an area in track and field where we went basically from 6 to 8 competitions throughout the year, where we really had to periodize into peaking at certain times, to a group of operators who essentially have to be ready at all times. So when we look at it, our operators are always training. So what they do is they cycle through a period of high readiness, a period of essentially a workup or their training, or a period of leave. So when we look at it, the operators have to, when we look at it, they have to be able to go at all times. So although we have these distinct periods, the period of readiness always has to be available to them. So this really affects how we train the operators and what we do, because at any point in their career or at any point in their life cycle, they have to be able to go, and at any moment on demand, they have to be called upon. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm James Bunce. I'm the Director of High Performance at US Soccer. High performance means a lot of things for a lot of different organizations, and it's a little bit of a buzzword, but for us at US Soccer, high performance and my remit is to oversee sports medicine, sports science and performance, and then sporting analytics. We have quite a lot of teams. We have 21 teams. We have a women's program from our women's seniors. They've just won their 4th World Cup, all the way down to our under 14s on the women's side. And similarly on the men's, we have a men's program all the way down to our U14s. We also have a futsal, para and beach team, which is kind of our extended national team. So we have a lot of players, a lot of teams. Unlike Clive, our problem is we don't have a lot of games, we don't have a lot of contact. We only see players for about 10 days at a time, every month to 6 weeks. We also don't see the same cohort of players because we change our rosters based on performance, injuries, and a lot of our hard work of development of players is happening in the club. So a lot of communication, and I'm sure we'll get into this, and data exchange is critical, because their everyday environment is not with us. We have to try and sprinkle some magic, and when they come together, put on a show. We're also compounded by the fact that we are a traveling circus. We do not have a home base. We do not have a home facility. Our women's team played in Charlotte last night, won 2-0, and they're on their way now to Chicago for another game on Sunday. So that means packing up, unpacking, and trying to keep an elite performance environment at all times with an ever-changing environment and structure. So it's a challenge. It's one that we embrace, but it's certainly kind of a big one.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I enjoy a few beers, so this one's going to be directed at you, Clive, so I don't have to get up early in the morning. So maintenance, and we were going to touch on it and understand that you're going to touch on this probably more tomorrow, but just the maintenance around their strength and conditioning. You said that they play 90% of the time or throughout the season or more. They're practicing every day as well. How do you get a strength and conditioning session in and accommodate your sort of facilitate their power and strength programs?
So it's an interesting question. It comes down, I think, first thing that, anyone who's been around me long enough will understand that 20 years of working with team sport athletes is what you're actually dealing with is a group of, when it comes to their conditioning, you're dealing with a group of individuals. So every program is individualized. So it's taken us a while, but all 330 players in the system have got an individualized program. So the idea of the planning model is to get them all to arrive on the field ready to go, but how they get there is down to their individual routine. So the easiest ones, and we'll split the players into groups. The easiest ones to manage are the starting pitches. They're the ones that we can predict. We'll lay out their routine, and they'll pitch. They get 4 days off. They'll pitch again. We know pretty much we can block that out. And so what I'll do tomorrow is outline how we break those 5 days down and what we individualize in each of those days. They're the easiest ones to deal with, and probably the more common themes that most people will recognize. Anyone who's got a 5-day turnaround. For the other players, for the everyday players, then it comes for the relief pitchers. They may have to come in and throw anywhere between 3 deliveries and 90 in some instances, that we have some rules laid down about when how we use them and how many days we use them and etc. But a lot of the time they're not sure when they're gonna pitch, so they actually might come and do their conditioning afterwards, after they throw. But if they're going to throw the next day, then we've got to be careful about what we do in terms of that conditioning session. So we try and use our emphasis loading around them. Is if we think they might pitch, it's trying to stay away. It's very much preparation recovery around the arm, the shoulder, and then we'll focus more on the legs, etc. But we take the chances then to load their upper body work when we can. The everyday position players, it's largely down to their routine. If they want to lift or do strength work before a game, they'll come in at 12 o'clock. The game's at 7 o'clock. We get the lift in, then they have lunch, then they go into a skills session, and individual preparation work, and then batting practice is about 4:30. So we'll give them that opportunity then. A lot of the guys, like for example, if you're a catcher, you don't want to go and do ground-based weight training work before going out and catching 9 innings. So they'll actually do their routine after the game. And what we tend to do with those guys is say, okay, look, if we ideally have 3 sessions in a week, what we'll do is to break those down into 6 half sessions or quarter sessions. And then depending on how the player feels when they come out, off the, if they're like, I feel good, we may go after it a bit. If they say, no, actually, look, a tough game, I'm feeling tired, we'll modify what we plan for them for their quarter of the workout, if that makes sense. So it's very much about building the relationship with the player, working with the player. I'd love to say it was about using the objective monitoring. We have the CBA, the Players Union, and agents that get in the way of that. So I'll talk tomorrow, but we have some players who are highly compliant and highly bought in to the sports science of it, and there are some who will not give us, they wouldn't even tell us the time if we asked them, So that really is down to the individual. But that's, in a nutshell, that's how we do it. Tomorrow I will provide specific routines and examples so that people can see how we break that down.
James, you got the mic over there. How do you handle the incoming players for those 10 days?
Yeah, again, we're not the owners of these players on a day-to-day basis, so we can't just go and start making up strength and conditioning programs for them when they've been following a different regime, a different power phase, or a different kind of timeline on their own periodization. So again, for us as a federation, a big part of our work is communication. We want to be the best gatekeepers for those players whilst they're with us for those 10 days, and we really try and pride ourselves on that. So continuity of their programming is more of a thing that they're trying to do with us. So if they're coming from a club in Europe or they're coming from a club in America, we want to work with those clubs to see what they're doing, what their limitations are, and then build that into our programming while still trying to win 2 games in that 10-day period. So a lot of it comes down to, again, not trying to reinvent the wheel, but to communicate, to share data, to share expectations, and then to be honest with the clubs and try and continue the work, which is obviously great work in most cases that they're doing. That's specifically with our older age groups. It does change slightly in the youth phases because we're getting players from less staffed environments where they may not have the resources of the professional clubs. So there we do take a more active lead on programming them in season and out of season. We do share programs with them. We do monitor them a lot out of season as well. And we take a more profound lead on that. Again, we're only in for 10 days, so talking about long-term, strength adaptation, power conversion phases would be a lie because we can't do that in 10 days. We're not that good. But we try to, if we pick up on something, if a player's struggling on exercise or a player's constantly going to valgus on a squat, we inform them, we try and tweak it, and we try to work with the clubs to make sure they're doing the appropriate needs. But for us, it's about ensuring that when we return them back to the club, they're healthy, they're fit, they've had a good experience and a good environment, and essentially we're keeping on that long-term pathway that they're following away from us.
Gents, anything else that you want to add to that? Just around, sort of your environments and maintenance when they come in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a real challenge with our group because, again, at all periods, we have to challenge our people so that they develop small incremental gains over long periods of time, and yet are always ready to be deployed. So this happens often. We build our best plan, and then someone has to leave at an immediate notice and go do something that we actually don't entirely know what they have to do. So that has to be factored into all of our planning of how we actually incorporate. So everything we do for our operators is built around sustainability, repeatability, variability, and a wide bandwidth for operational success. So that really dictates how we do any of our physical training. We're in other sports, other seasons that I'd worked with, we could build off previous phases. We could build towards some kind of physical peaking, some kind of overreaching, work on certain capacities. This has to occur with our operators over years and years. So it really becomes a slow progression, allowing that we have these incremental gains over long periods of time and don't get any major setbacks, while allowing them to deploy at a moment's notice in potentially a situation that they don't know what they're going into and we don't know what they're going into, and an area where we may not have contact with them over prolonged periods of time. So that poses some real challenges in how we incorporate our physical training into their daily lives.
Looking at the remote program, so how do you manage your skiers' programs or just their seasons when they're all over the world, they're located in any different region? Just a bit of insight into that.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say my first iteration with the ski team, I traveled full time with them. So it was super easy. They never really were remote. I was always with them. Simple enough. This time around, we've kind of dialed back the travel for the support staff. So now they are more remote. So I would say our biggest kind of ways we help them out is we educate the athlete, and we really try to get them to almost run their own program, know what to do every day based on how they're feeling. So throughout the summer, we just teach them, based on this is what you should do. We'll give them kind of a selection of sessions they can do. If you're feeling really fresh, let's do a power session. If you're maybe a little more fatigued, maybe we'll go for more strength, or based on what you did the past couple days, we'll do this or that. So we kind of give them a menu of what to do, and then they can kind of select for themselves with some guidance from us. And then along with that, the rest of the actual technical coaches, they'll actually run some of the sessions for us. So getting their buy-in, getting them and their support, it's not just technical support in terms of S&C or sports science, but it's also the mental support because it's essentially a traveling family on the road. They are with the athletes 24/7, 6, 7, 8 months of the year. And it's a group of maybe 10 people. So you really get to know who you're with. And so you really have to have a really well defined and really cooperative support network around that. So it's just, getting the support staff and the technical coaches to really help out. And then I would say we just use the standard resources, wellness, that kind of stuff. I will say with wellness, I've done some research in the very research-based wellness questionnaires. How valid and reliable are they? And now I'm actually moving towards really, really simple, like one question wellness questionnaires, because that will help me drive a conversation with them, because I don't have an answer. So you're just feeling poor today. Okay, well, that forces me to pick up my phone and talk to them in Europe of what's going on, instead of just reading my computer screen and an output of this number says this, okay, I assume this. But instead, it's going to force me to figure out what's going on, and maybe it has nothing to do with skiing or training or whatever, and it's, I don't know, they were in a car accident or something, or what, they lost their ski bag, and that's where everything's coming from. So I think, using resources like that, where it actually forces some of these other communication, and actually get to know your athlete kind of thing. So
on that as well, like any technology that assists with your remote players and programs. So yeah, how you sort of integrate that and sharing insight into that.
This time of year for us, this is when this opportunity really applies, because the players disperse at the end of the year and they go home. So we saw this as a big opportunity. Firstly, it's an indicator for us of success of what we do around the players and how well we support them, is how many players choose to make their home Florida, and actually come and train with us in the off season. And that's difficult for other guys, because one of the things they could say, okay, I'm going to move my family to Florida, I'm going to train with you in the off season, and then suddenly find they're traded tomorrow, and their training base is now Arizona and they're with another organization. So it's a difficult decision for a player to make. So, but we've had a reasonable success rate for that. We think it's a good indicator, and actually it's a real credit to the team that works around our major league program, the strength staff and the trainers and the physios that work with them daily. That probably about every year 25 to 50% over the last 4 years of players in the major league have actually migrated to Florida to train with in the off season. That's great, and that's a real credit to the staff who work with them. So for the other guys, then the big software advantage that we've had was employing Bridge Tracker as a strength and conditioning software. So basically now the player gets their programs on their phone. They can see the exercises, they can see the videos, they can see the prescription, they can do the exercise, they can enter the load they did, and then we can get the feedback from that directly. So that's a big advance for us in terms of data communication. And then it's about developing relationships with the people who will work with those players in the off season. So we completely individualize the player's program. We will then contact the person they're going to work with, their preferred coach at their location, and say, look, this is the program, this is what we'd like them to do, this is why we'd like them to do it. And we try and establish as clear a relationship as we can with them, so that they have, a lot of the time they'll come back and say, well, I like to do this, or I want to do that. And it's like, okay, look, how can we work with you to compromise around the player's aims without doing something completely different? Sometimes we have success with that. Sometimes they're like, yeah, thanks very much, guys. I heard you. I'm going to do this with him, and I've done this with him for the last 3 years. And, we have to accept that. And then it's a case of communication with the player through the Bridge Tracker app, but also picking the phone up. Or, we'll if we have a collection of players on the West Coast, then we'll fly staff out to the West Coast in the off season, and they'll go and visit those players, check in with them, see how they're going, make sure the players still realise they're off time, they're downtime, but just check in with them. How are you doing? How can we help?
So we really have two distinct groups within our operator community. So we have our candidates and then our badged operators. So the way we actually work with them remotely changes vastly between the two groups. So our candidates we have high control over. We know their schedule more or less. We also have instructors who are with them day in, day out. So this gives us opportunities to actually work to apply some of the different monitoring techniques. So we monitor their sleep. We intermittently monitor all of their physical capacities. That opens up the window for us to actually affect how the course is going for the candidates. So what will happen right now is if we have a candidate who flags on, say, a poor sleep score, poor HRV score, they'll actually flag to us, and we can have the communication and open up a dialogue with some of the instructors, say, hey, this guy's really struggling. Maybe you might want to have a conversation with them or take a different approach from a learning perspective. So we've had a lot of success with that so far. From our candidates, this really is an easy way to do it because we have distinct blocks of what the different skill sets they're working on, and we understand that there's different periods where there might be more of a window of trainability or a window of just monitoring and making sure they're making it through whatever their high skill, high stress phase is. Our badged operators are a little different because when they travel remotely, there's a vast difference in what kind of equipment they have available. So really what we try and do is we try and give them different levels of programming or different levels of accessibility to what they need. So we go all the way down from paper to an app-based program that we have a lot of success with. And our best way to do it really is to develop competencies with the operator. So when they travel, we really want to create if-then situations with them and have them understand and have the competency within their own training paradigm of which pillar of performance to actually target. So there might be periods and might be operational tasks where they actually can't work on physical capacities. And we want them to be able to recognize that, understand that themselves, and then choose what it might be that they need, whether it's a social, emotional, cognitive workload that they actually have to train or they have the opportunity to work on. And that can only come through communication and then education with them, because when we have some of our operators overseas, there's a lack of connectivity, there's a lack of even knowledge of where they're going to be. So we could have someone train at a really well-defined base, let's say in Iraq, or we could have someone train in an area where they're essentially sleeping in a tent. We really don't know that until after the fact. So really developing that relationship as the operator leaves allows us to put them in the best position to succeed wherever they might be.
So I guess adding on to that, how do you deal with the unknowns? So you've got your athletes coming into camp and they've got their clubs. How do you deal with that? What are some sort of strategies you've got in place to get that data in that you certainly want to?
Yeah, that's been a big challenge for us, and not just harping on because it's a Smartabase conference, but Smartabase does a great job of that. We needed a technology that would import from multiple different technologies, because we can't define what clubs are using, whether it's a different GPS provider, whether it's a different wellness tracker, whether it's a different heart rate variability tracker. We need to accept whatever they're doing and embrace that as a challenge. But we also want the data, and so we've built really strong relationships with those clubs to give us the athletes that we're bringing in's data, so we can essentially try to make sure there are less unknowns and have our own pathway for the players coming into our environment. That is challenging, and I guess the first kind of 3 days of a 10-day camp are kind of regulating all those unknowns and getting everyone on the same page. So different training groups, different regimes, different loads, and trying to make sure that we've ingested all that information, all those variables, and then get everyone on the same page and then go as a group. Because if we come in and treat every athlete, and I know that's something that everyone in this room must testify to, that every athlete is different, needs to be treated differently, we need to ingest that, we need to regulate for that, and then we need to build programming that is applicable to each athlete. And that's a challenge, but again, we're a new Smartabase user. We've only been using it for 3 months, but previous to that, we would be ingesting Excels and having to look at them at Excel, databases from Stat Sports or GPS companies, and having to try and regulate that in real time on our computers. So having those direct APIs coming into a centralized location, having to build our own visualizations on what we're trying to see and regulate for those nuances has been a big uplift for us. We still face challenges. We still face, not everyone wants to share data, but my mantra is kill them with kindness. Like we give them everything back with cherry on the top, because we've got nothing to hide. Ultimately, if we all believe in athlete health and well-being at the center of everything we're doing, which everyone should do, then sharing data that the athlete owns to make sure that they're in the best prime position is something that we all have to believe in. And for US Soccer, we certainly have got nothing to hide, and we're willing to share with anyone that will listen.
Sort of interested, like when the operators come back from that, like do you have sort of a sit-down meeting to understand what they've been going through, or how do you sort of work with
Yeah,
those?
so our best way to combat the unknown is to be, we really strive for the concept of being both embedded and integrated in our system. So we're pretty lucky that our unit has accepted us pretty as part of the unit. So the best thing we can do is our operators are very comfortable essentially telling us what they can and can't tell us. So anytime they leave and anytime they come back, we try and do a full intake, and we also do a reintegration back into movement, back into training. As part of their leave program, the unit's really supportive of all of that, so that includes all the testing. We do an entire battery of testing every time they come back from anything to figure out where their start point is. And again, we're just getting onboarded with Smartabase, so we're really excited to be able to put all these different data platforms that we have going on right now into one place, so we can start to create some connections across all of them. But that's really how it starts with us, is anytime an operator comes back, no matter how long or short the operation they were on is, we do a touch point, we do a build out, we figure out where their start point is, and then we expand out from there based on where that individual is and how hard that task was for them.
Just one that I'm pretty interested in is travel. And Bob, we'll start with you if that's all right. Any sort of strategies that you've got in place to mitigate the travel effects on your athletes?
So even though we are relatively based in Europe during the season, it still definitely entails 8-hour drives across Europe. So there is still rather significant travel, and that's in a relatively cramped, sprinter van. So it's not too luxurious of a travel, but I think it's just really comes down to the simple stuff. I don't know if this is really a thing, but kind of like instead of sleep hygiene, but like travel hygiene, literal hygiene of washing your hands a lot, but also just the normal, making sure you're taking care of your sleep, nutrition, hydration, all that stuff. And also once they get somewhere, to actually get them moving, because it often is 8 p.m. at night, and they might have to train early the next morning, but actually really getting them to get up and move through various planes of motion. And with that, we actually travel with basically a full gym in our sprinter vans. So we'll travel with a couple spin bikes, full barbell set, 200 kilos of weights, everything you might need, because you have to set that up in a hotel room, in a hallway, wherever. So you need to make sure you have everything you need at your disposal. You can't just bank on a hotel gym, because in Europe, if some of you may know, it's totally hit or miss. So we just bring it with us.
James, Clive, any wonder techs that you're utilising with the schedules or the travel environment?
I'm going to talk through tomorrow probably an example of some of our travels. The big challenge is Major League, but it's also the easiest one to do, because we have a 52-seat all first class jet that we travel on. We can regulate that environment. Now, if you're in AA, you're going to finish a game at 11 o'clock at night. You're going to get in a bus, and you're going to travel 14 hours on that bus, and arrive the next day and expect to play the game. So it's some of our minor league presents different challenges than the Major League travel schedule does. And so we're utilizing, for example, the Firefly technology there, which is a stimulator of the common perineal nerve that basically just increases the blood flow for the players. So we've looked at some research in that, and we found it increases testosterone, reduces cortisol, but more importantly, just increases the blood flow, reduces inflammation, and helps the players to recover better from a point when they've been fairly immobilized on a bus for a long period of time. We have a full-time nutritionist who travels with each of our staff, so we do our best to get the appropriate nutrition into them, but understand as well that you're on those 14-hour journeys. You're going to stop. You are not stopping at a high-quality restaurant. You're in a roadside donor. Make the best of it you can. So we do the best we can to mitigate, but they're probably some of the toughest things that, for both the players and the coaches that we do our best to overcome. I'll talk about the Major League tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a big problem for us because we're a national team. We absorb players from across the world. We've got players in Europe. We've got across Europe. Being from a country where you can drive across it in 4 hours, coming to America as well, where you can get jet lag crossing the country, that was a nuance I wasn't used to. So we similarly invest a lot in sleep hygiene and travel hygiene. When we have a player coming from Europe, which again could be 9, 10 time zone differences, we send them out like a starter pack, which has things like fireflies, sleep masks, neck braces, and things like that to help their first class travel a bit more comfortable. So we try and encourage that. When we send them home, even if they're in the MLS in the US, we send them home with fireflies and things like this to try and help that. From a technology perspective, we've started to do some work with fatigue science to help us in specific scenarios where we're traveling to a tournament where we have multiple players coming from different time zones and trying to optimize when do we want these players to sleep, when do we want them to wake up, and when's the optimization for training time, because again we can control that, but we look on that kind of research and that kind of expertise for those specific moments to build into our program, which we can own and flexible.
Awesome. Dale, anything to add?
Yeah, so we have, there's two distinct different types of travel for our group. So the one type, they'll go on a deployment for an extended period of time and they'll be at a clearly defined base. So for us, it's really funny because in my short time working with operators, I've learned that if they can go, they'll go. They'll just, if you give them the opportunity to take the training wheels off them, they'll go as hard as they can. So actually starting to educate them that there is time to acclimatize. There are some strategies, even from a standpoint of hydration and movement and stuff while flying. We've really started making some inways on there. The other group that we have is someone who has to go for a very, very short period of time. And those, again, they'll fly in not the best situations, and we've started getting, and they'll have to do something immediately. So in those people, what we've done and started creating some mobility plans, started creating some movement plans, some strategies for them while they're in these hercs or whatever they might be, where they actually have space to do movement. So rather than just lay there for 8 hours, they actually are preparing themselves to do whatever they might need to do immediately. And so actually some of the lowest hanging fruit has been some of the best strategies. We're really excited to start working with fatigue science with our helicopter group and looking at some of the travel with them and some of their readiness. I think there's huge opportunity there. We're in the early stages of really making that an in-way for our group.
I'm just curious on the U.S. teams, the development side, you're dealing with 15-year-olds or the new phenom coming up. How do you start incorporating that idea, the training and process, along with the parents and everything else that's involved? The challenges there?
Yeah, again, the next talent isn't being developed by US Soccer solely. It's being developed in a unique club with its unique DNA and its unique challenges. So our role as the kind of governance of that is to try to impart wisdom, education to those clubs to pass on to the players. From my background of a club that developed amazing talented players in soccer from the UK, we wanted to engage with those players and make them own it themselves, and the parents be a part of that journey. So we, like I said earlier, kill them for kindness. We would share everything. There was nothing, if we're taking something off you, a data point, we'd explain why, we'd share it with you daily. And again, the biggest thing that's bad in soccer and probably other sports is giving youth athletes time. That's the biggest gift you can give a youth player, because there's so many early assumptions made. There's so many, gut feels. We heard that earlier about, from Gus about the coach's interpretation. That may be fine if you're dealing with a 21-year-old. If they're crap at 21, they might just be crap. But if they're 13 and late maturer and, come from a different environment, time is the biggest gift you can give a youth player. So, that's something that we as a federation strongly believe in. I strongly believe in it from a philosophical standpoint. But from a young talented player's perspective, again, we we shouldn't be treating those players any differently than anyone else in that pathway. We want to support all of them reach the highest level, whether that's winning World Cups with our women's team or playing D1 college soccer. We want to help them get to the highest level that is possible.
I think, yeah, I mean, for us in terms of player development, it's about where do you enter our system, and there's three real points for entry. One is in the international draft, and we could spend several $1 million on a 16-year-old player that could come in from the Dominican Republic, for example. They'll be in a different boat from the several $1 million we're playing on a first-round draft pick who's coming from high school. And they'll be in a different boat from the several $1 million we'll pay on a first-round draft pick who's coming from college. So they'll all come into the same point, but they're going to be treated differently. The emphasis will still be the same, though, in that, I mean, we want the player to be empowered to own their own program. So similar to what you were saying is like, if you were going to be at the major league in 4 or 5 years' time, you have to take responsibility for your own development. So we will put the expertise around you, we will put the resources around you, but you have to take ownership of your own program. And I think that's something that we stress right from the start with all the players. But if you've been in a college program for 3 years, you're in a very different physical development piece from if we drafted you as a 17-year-old high schooler or 16-year-old from the Dominican Republic. So the program will be built around the needs of the athlete as and when they come to us, and then they will be put in the appropriate environment to challenge either their physical capacities or their skill development as appropriate, and then we'll progress them through the system from there.
My question is kind of geared towards James for USA Soccer. With like Tokyo 2020 kind of coming up, how are you kind of strategically planning to deal with the extreme environmental stress, but then simultaneously also the travel stress? That's going to be a really big factor when it comes to everything, because like a lot of people will focus on the heat and how to mitigate the thermal stress, whether that be cooling, acclimating before you go. But then you have the big factor, it's like when you're tapering, you have to also travel multiple time zones over to Japan. Get there too early, you might mess up your tapering. Get there too late, you might not shift your circadian clock quick enough.
Yeah, you're giving me palpitations thinking about it already. First of all, we've got to qualify, so touch wood, that part's taken care of. It's challenges. The beauty of the United States of America is that there are a lot of environmental challenges right on our doorstep that we do play in. We've played here, we've played in Denver, we've played in Mexico City. So we are used to these challenges. We do have protocols and standards that we have built based on those kind of environments, and we're very ready for those. From a cooling perspective, we try to manage that as and when we can with the techniques, whether it's plunge pools, hand immersion, feet immersion, cooling towels and things like that. From a travel perspective in the Olympics, you don't necessarily control that aspect of the schedule, because often that is put on by the organization committee. We had the same in France, where we were playing in 100-degree heat in Paris, which was not normal, but I was actually asked this on Good Morning America. They said, how are you dealing with this? This must be frightening. It's like, no, because we've played in 100-degree heat. We're actually used to this. We're not now scrambling to look up on PubMed how to deal with 100-degree heat. We're just going into action and unleashing our protocols, and we're ready for them. If it was at that point when we're in the Olympics and we're scrambling, then I probably shouldn't be in my role, and we probably should have looked at that earlier. But that said, it is a genuine challenge, and the reality of a team sport on the road in a tournament setting is you will never get it textbook. You will never be able to create that perfect environment where you've tapered, like, God, wish I could taper, but into that kind of perfect peak performance. But you have to try to get it to that near perfection. And as an organization, the good thing about a governing body, the good thing about places like this, the good thing about meeting organizations like Ski and Snowboard, that we are all dealing with these kind of challenges, and we're all like-minded individuals who want to share the best practices. So that's how we build our protocols. We never deviate from those, and when called into action, whether it be Japan or France at 100 degrees, we just spring into action and deliver on those needs.
I'm actually really interested in how you guys deal with that, because you might go from the desert to the Arctic and somewhere in the middle, right? So
Yeah, so it's actually super cool with our group is that we have separate research teams for acclimatization. They do extensive research into how to acclimatize, the different protocols, also the different clothings, and so that we're lucky because we have a really extensive group that does a lot of that work. So we don't have to have that kind of headache with that. In my previous track, we had to worry about that quite a bit. But yeah, our research team's really good at that kind of stuff, and our operators are really bought into it. Obviously, wherever they go, they want to be comfortable. So they do a lot of the research themselves and have reached out to many of the companies that allow them to climatize in the different places. So.
Thanks. Mostly hearing about Dale's problems makes me glad that I at least have some known ones. One of the things that myself and Bob at Ski and Snowboard struggle with is the idea of sort of building chronic load, or we have this periods of summer where there's no snow available, and then we have a camp in August for 3 weeks in New Zealand, and then get this spike of sport-specific load. 3 weeks, it's expensive to be down there. You want to get as much out of your training, but we've not done skiing for a long time. And I'm just wondering if you guys have any strategies. Probably not Clive with 161 games. Chronic load's probably you've got that problem dialed, but if you guys ever struggle with that, or how you sort of bridge into a program where you haven't been doing, so how do you ramp it up quickly but not too quickly, or any just thoughts on that idea? Because or other people in the room.
I think that's an interesting challenge for any sport. It was one of the ones when I was back in the UK and working with soccer and rugby, the pre-season bit was always an interesting one for me, because the typical thing that someone would do in the first day of pre-season was maximum testing, which never quite made any sense to me, given what we know about adaptation. So one of the strategies I used to actually overcome that with the rugby franchise was actually we put the players, we broke the off season down into a period of time where we said to them, like, okay, you've just played a long season, you played 38 games, we got in the playoffs, right, or whatever. You're gonna have 3 weeks where you can just do nothing or do whatever you want, just stay active. Then you have 3 week build up phase. Then you got 3 weeks of your own training. Here's our program that we want you to do. And at the end of that 3 weeks, you're going to report back to the club, and here's the tests that you're going to do, and here's the targets you're going to have. And if you meet those targets, then you can go and have another 3 weeks of self-directed training. If you don't meet the targets, you get 3 weeks with me, which no one wants. And so we try to use strategies like that to empower the athletes, to say, look, this is in your hands. Here's what we recommend to put in wherever you, and the rugby players, they may be in Australia, they may be in New Zealand, they may be in the UK, wherever. So we would try and find strategies like that to try and empower them to build up their own chronic load prior to coming to us, and put it in their hands. Now, that's not sport-specific training as such, but they were going to come into a period of 14 weeks of preseason training. And in that 14 weeks, they play 3 games. So it was the chronic load for them was more building up into a more physical progression. The actual problem we have with the baseball guys, believe it or not, is actually stopping them hitting and stopping them, the pitchers want I need to go back and work on my delivery. And it's like, no, you don't. Give it some time, I'm not sure that actually answers your question, and probably because I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah, for us, it's about managing the acute, really, because with 10 days, we don't want to overkill them with a big session that we don't know what they've done coming into us, and that's why the data exchange that I talked about in previous answer is so key, so we can actually monitor that, so that if we are asking them to do something, it's not going to cause a catastrophic spike in potential injury risk. In a soccer standpoint from back in the Premier League, the chronic was easy because we had a 10.5 month season, and you would be able to build that periodically through it. The challenge was trying to prevent burnout and overtraining and coach reactions and things like that. So the chronic load in soccer in a club environment isn't the challenge. In our environments, when they're in and out, that is really difficult to try to create, impossible in a 10-day camp for us. It's more about damage limitation and making sure that we manage the acute load better.
I think it's, as Clive was kind of mentioning, it's, the coaches get excited coming back to being on snow, and they want to smash them the first day. and so and second and third, and and they're with no not a bad intention, but they're just excited. The athletes are fresh. They're ready to get back to what they're there for. They're not gym rats. They're there to ski. So it's definitely a balance of kind of figuring out where to start and where to go, and it's really just trying to educate the coaches of how to actually progress load and what is load. We really have a problem of every day looks the same. There is no periodization in their on snow training load, and so it's how can we educate the coach to have lows and highs, and this is in season too and in a camp. So it's not just every day going to basically failure. It's having an easy day, but you're still on snow, still being able to acquire some skill and technique, but and then you have other days that are maybe more physically based that you actually get some physical stimulus out of. So I think it's just a bit of that coach education. So.